Hello and a very warm welcome. You're watching Middle East Now on I24 News. I'm Laura Cellier and these are the headlines. US President Donald Trump doubles down on his plan to transfer civilians out of Gaza and says they deserve to live without violence. UNRWA staff prepare to close their Jerusalem offices as a law banning the group's activities in Israel comes into force. And an Emirati group invests in Israeli tech, while a major Emirati investor cancels plans to invest in Lebanon, citing uncertainty. The US President Donald Trump is doubling down on his proposal to transfer millions of people from Gaza to Egypt and Jordan, saying they deserve to live away from violence for a while. The offer has been met with a firm but polite refusal from Cairo and Amman. Egypt disputed Trump's claim that he had spoken on the phone with President al-Sisi. And Albania's Prime Minister dismissed Israeli TV reports that his country had been tapped to take in refugees. Well, Trump's call to move people out of Gaza has been welcomed by members of Israel's far right, but has caused significant unease in many Arab capitals. More in this report.
Well, I'd like to get them living in an area where they can live without disruption and revolution and violence so much as when you look at the Gaza Strip, it's been hell for so many years. And it just seems to me there's been various civilizations on that strip, It didn't start here. It started thousands of years before. And there's always been violence associated with it. So I think you could get people living in areas that are a lot safer and maybe a lot better and maybe a lot more comfortable.
Reiterating statements made to journalists on Sunday about the relocation of Palestinians in Gaza to Egypt and Jordan, the U.S. president insisted on Monday that the two leaders would be on board with the idea. Meanwhile, Egypt denies reports that President Sisi has spoken with Trump, and both Egypt and Jordan have come out strongly against Trump's idea, saying that Palestinians should be allowed to remain in Gaza.
Our stance that the two-state solution is the path to achieving peace is firm and unwavering. Our rejection of displacement is also firm and unwavering.
2 days after President Trump's statement and his phone call with Jordan's King Abdullah, Secretary of State Marco Rubio held a separate call with the Jordanian monarch. Rubio thanked King Abdullah for his support of the ceasefire, but made no reference to Trump's remarks on relocating the civilians in Gaza. Senior Hamas official Mohammed Nazal dismissed Trump's comments as, quote, very strange, adding that the Palestinian people who paid with their blood in exchange for steadfastness on their land will not leave Gaza.
I think this dramatic statement from President Trump came in order to try to rescue Netanyahu from sinking in the sands of Gaza, because apparently Netanyahu has a big political dilemma with the day after of this war. I think that the Palestinians in Gaza and in the West Bank and everywhere, together with the Jordanians and the Egyptians, will definitely reject this proposal.
When asked if this stance means he no longer believes in a two-state solution, Trump avoided answering directly, saying he'll be discussing the issue with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu when he comes to Washington to meet him in the not-so-distant future.
So doubling down, and Trump's Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, is to arrive in Israel tomorrow and is expected to visit Gaza. Well, let's go to the US. We're joined by our senior correspondent there, Mike Wagenheim. So, Mike, we know that Donald Trump does tend to open negotiations with a pretty extreme position. He has repeated it, though, twice now. Is that what's happening here?
Seems to be. It's his M.O. I mean, we can only go on past history here. Donald Trump tends to open these talks with pie in the sky. We're going to take over the Panama Canal and Greenland and everything else, and then kind of whittles it down, as he's known to do throughout his political and oftentimes his business career as well. So this seems to be in line with that. The issue is, who is he talking to here? If he's talking to Sisi, apparently Sisi didn't know it, at least according to the Egyptian foreign ministry and the government, because they say there's no such conversation that's taken place lately, at least on this particular matter here. So, Trump has leaned on Sisi in the past for certain things. He's also boasted and praised his relationship with Sisi as well. This is going to be one of the more difficult, and that's an understatement, asks of Trump toward El Sisi, if he can get him to even open up the gates to Palestinians, let alone moving them in full force into Cairo, even into Sinai here. There's a lot of questions and many more questions and answers at this point as to whether this conversation even took place, let alone if this is something that's even remotely feasible and workable.
And Mike, we're hearing that the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, meanwhile, has been on the phone with Qatar's Emir to discuss the future of Gaza. Any idea what was said?
Yeah, the State Department hasn't yet confirmed that call took place, but Qatar certainly has. They said that a discussion took place earlier today between Rubio and Qatari Prime Minister Al-Thani, discussing regional developments, Gaza, Syria, Lebanon, specifically about the ceasefire in Gaza, making sure all parties are held to account, and a little bit of talk about the broader bilateral relationship between the U.S. and Qatar. Keep in mind, Marco Rubio, during his time in the Senate, during the course of the Israel-Hamas war, was very critical of Qatari leadership for what he felt was a coddling Hamas and refusing to put pressure on their patron there in Gaza. Now, under the Trump administration and trying to push forward a ceasefire here under the leadership of Steve Witkoff, that relationship, I'm sure, will be a little bit more I would say less tense, at least in the near future here, as the U.S. tries to make sure that Qatar plays its part in keeping this ceasefire in line and moving toward a second phase here in the coming weeks.
Mike, thank you very much indeed. Mike Wagenheim there. Well, Trump's proposals do provide a contrast with what we're seeing on the ground in Gaza, where tens of thousands of people have moved back north of the Strip after the IDF opened up a key crossing yesterday. Hamas claims as many as 300,000 people are back in the north. Israel says that number is much lower. Well, with me in the studio this hour, our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osiran and Yaakov Lapin, the host of the Lapin Assessment on Patreon. He's also a military and strategic affairs analyst at the Miriam Institute and the Jewish News Syndicate. Welcome to you both. Yaakov, Trump's plan has clearly ruffled a lot of feathers in the region, to say the least. But is there some underlying logic to it? And does it signal to Israel what his position is when it comes to the future of Gaza?
I think if we look at this from a realist perspective, this plan is kryptonite for the leaders of Egypt, for Sisi, and for King Abdullah of Jordan, for a very simple reason. Both of these leaders have Islamist enemies, always looking to attack and delegitimize them, and they're always already now presenting them as collaborators of Israel. So for them to go along with a plan that would involve the relocation of large numbers of Gazans to their territory, that, in their view, would seal their fate, and no amount of money, international aid, debt relief, whatever Trump wants to promise to these leaders, will help them if they're deposed and thrown into prison by their own populations. That's what they're scared of the most, and that's why they themselves will never agree to a plan like this.
And I guess it also underlines the fact that they haven't taken in any refugees during the war.
Yeah, we've seen reports of tens of thousands, up to 100,000 Gazans passing through Egypt during the past 15 months, which is a significant number. But again, it all comes down to this issue of legitimacy. The Egyptians have kept their borders sealed shut. Actually, they've only increased border security, border barriers. They are scared, first of all, of delegitimization and also of security threats. Hamas is a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is Sisi's top adversary. And he does not want large numbers of Palestinians with Hamas embedded in them moving into Sinai. By the way, there's history of this in the Arab world. This has never worked out well for Arab countries that took in large numbers of Palestinians. We only have to remember Black September in Jordan, Lebanon, which descended into civil war. So not only the delegitimization threat, but also history tells these Arab leaders that they're not going to go along with this. Again, this is kryptonite as far as they're concerned. They're not going to go along with it.
Meanwhile, Ariel, give us a sense of what is happening on the ground. You've got thousands of civilians moving north. Hamas is claiming that figure is much larger. There are supposed to be unarmed civilians under the deal. But a lot are encountering a pretty brutal reality when they get back to where their homes were in the north of Gaza.
Right. So just to hop off just the back end of what Yaakov said, this is a red line for Egypt. They will not allow any transfer of Palestinians to their territory. And to my understanding, not only did a phone call between Trump and Sisi not revolve around this, but they didn't have the phone call. This phone call did not happen yet. It could happen. And Trump said it was supposed to happen already 2 days ago. It didn't happen yet, to the best of my knowledge. Now, as for the reality on the ground, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Gazans are waking up to the stark reality of going back to their homes just to realize that their homes aren't there anymore. The land is there, but there's nothing on top. It's all been reduced to rubble, and you are hearing growing calls against Hamas, accusing them of this reality, which would go in stark contrast to the images that Hamas tried to portray on Saturday of they're in control, they're the victors. This is not what victory looks like, at least not in the eyes of ordinary Gazans. Obviously, you're not going to see protests in the streets, but the understanding of the complete destruction that was brought upon them by Hamas, this is a reality that Gazans are waking up to these days.
And just a quick word, Yaakov, on Qatar, because we heard that Qatar's leaders have been speaking to the US Secretary of State. I mean, Qatar has its own ideas about what it would like Gaza to look like in the future.
Yeah, I'm sure that it does. But I think that, after the hostage deal is seen to its maximum, most advanced stage, my own view is that Israel has to start sidelining Qatar, because at the end of the day, Qatar's role, when you look at the net role that Qatar has played, it is there to try and basically pursue its own agenda, which means backing Hamas, backing the Islamists, allowing Al Jazeera to destabilize its neighbors. And so whatever role that Qatar wants to play in Gaza, I think it needs to be essentially phased out in favor of far more preferable partners from the Gulf, the UAE, the Saudis, those that do not cooperate with Hamas and Islamists. So that's, I think that should be an Israeli agenda going forward.
Okay. Well, Hamas officials are in Cairo, where they've been meeting with some of the 70 Palestinian prisoners who were freed by Israel over the weekend and sent into exile as part of that hostage deal. Well, meanwhile, Israel is preparing to receive another 3 hostages on Thursday. Female civilian Arbel Yahud and IDF soldier Agam Berger are supposed to be freed, along with a third unnamed hostage. Well, the 4 young IDF soldiers who were freed on Saturday are still recovering at the Beilinson Hospital in Petah Tikva, where we now find our correspondent Baleh Sladin. Baleh, more details emerging about the conditions that the 4 young women were held in, and Naama Levy in particular.
Yes, exactly. We're hearing the first comment from Naama Levy. Just to mention that today the 4 returnees have underwent a series of medical examination, and their condition is generally well. And Naama just around half an hour ago posted a post on Instagram saying, "I'm home after 477 days. I'm finally home. During the first 50 days since the 7th of October, I was held alone. After that, I was kept with the other hostages, and we gave each other hope and strength. We are waiting for Agam," she is saying, "and all the other hostages." And she confirmed in that post that she saw the effort that the family and the others have made for her release from Hamas's captivity. Similar thing we've heard also from other hostages. Now, more members of the families of the 4 returnees have visited them today. And of course, the medical staff here is giving them all what they need. And the journey of the recovery is supposed to prolong, of course. And that's something that the families of the 4 returnees will have to deal with. But they are supposed to be released tomorrow or maybe Thursday. That depends on whether Agam, their 5th friend, will join them this Thursday as well. And that's what we know, that the other hostages have asked actually to bring Agam here to Beilinson Hospital in order to join them in this hospital and be able to see her now outside of Gaza after the captivity. Arbel Yahud, the other female civilian, is supposed to go to Ichilov Hospital, another medical center that haven't still received any other hostage. And the third person, either a young man or an elderly man, is supposed to as well be seen whether he is going to Ichilov or some other medical center in Israel.
Baleh, thank you very much. Baleh Sladin there. And Yaakov Lapin, Ariel Osran with me in the studio. Yaakov, there are reports that the Qataris were not very happy with the show that Hamas tried to put on when it freed the 4 young IDF soldiers on Saturday. They've had 2 opportunities to kind of put on this big propaganda show. We can imagine they will try and do something similar on Thursday.
Yeah, look, first of all, I think that the last propaganda show that they tried to put on didn't work in their favor at all, simply because the young soldiers, the released hostages, displayed an incredible level of resilience and inner strength, which I think amazed everybody who was watching. And I don't think that worked in Hamas's favor at all. Generally speaking, I take everything that Qatar is saying publicly with a huge grain of salt, because I think they're under pressure from the Trump administration, and they're very eager to try and prove to the Trump administration that they are on the right side of things. And this is, very fickle, shifting sand, classic Qatari approach, dancing at every wedding. I really don't believe very much what they're putting out publicly. I think that they're simply trying to appease the Trump administration and be able to emerge from this war basically unscathed, with the U.S. military base remaining on its territory, and then, tuned into the global financial system and exerting their global influence all over the West. I think that's what they want to preserve. So I think that's the lens that we should view their actions in, as well as their past support for Hamas.
And of course, the whole deal nearly fell apart, Ariel, over one hostage, Arbel Yahoud, a civilian woman who is to be freed now on Thursday.
Yeah, that was Palestinian Islamic Jihad exhibiting bad faith in their negotiations. According to Hamas sources, they believe that this was the Iranians trying to encourage the Palestinian Islamic Jihad to challenge the implementation of the deal. Look, we're in for not only 32 days of gut-wrenching images coming out. We have at least 6 to 8 more rounds of these hostage releases, but overhead is looming the second phase, and on day 16, that is next week, talks regarding the next phase of the deal, of not only returning the male hostages, the soldiers, and the deceased hostages, but also what is the future of Gaza? Who will administer post-war Gaza? To my understanding, mediators are concerned that this second phase is in danger as it currently stands. And for them, what they want to see in administering post-war Gaza is they want to see this committee of technocrats put in place. This is the best compromise in their view, that it's not Hamas, it's not fully the Palestinian Authority that can help move Gaza forward. Right now, it's Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas who is the main challenge for this committee being established. He hasn't given the green light. As for Israel, they said that the Palestinian Authority will have no involvement in Gaza, but the PA officials are going to be part of the Rafah border crossing when it opens. It should be in the coming days.
Okay, thanks. Well, Iran's supreme leader has commented on the ceasefire deal. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei says that Gaza had brought Israel to its knees. Take a listen.
The small, limited Gaza brought the Zionist regime, armed to the teeth and fully supported by America, to its knees. Behind the smiles of diplomacy, there are enmities, grudges, and evil intentions. We should open our eyes and be careful with who we are facing, dealing with, and talking to.
Meanwhile, Iran's foreign minister said in a TV interview that an attack on the country's nuclear facilities would be, quote, crazy. Abbas Araghchi also ruled out nuclear talks with the US. Let's get more on that with Ben Taleblu. He's a senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Great to have you with us, Ben, and good evening. So the Supreme Leader, he seems to be trying to put a positive spin on the destruction in Gaza after, of course, referring to the war for the past 15 months as a genocide. Who is he talking to specifically with these comments?
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you, Laura. Make no mistake, Iran's supreme leader is under pressure from, if you could even imagine, something even further than his own right flank. Not the population, but ultra-hardline regime elites who have seen the Islamic Republic's axis of resistance get battered by sheer Israeli military capability over the past year and a half. And if you look at hardline Iranian newspapers this week and last week, particularly tied to the Trump inauguration as well as the start of the actual ceasefire, Iranian officials are trying to claim victory when the facts on the ground look like anything but.
What about those comments then from the Foreign Minister, Araghchi? Because the regime had recently been indicating that it was interested in returning to some kind of nuclear negotiations. He seems to be saying that's off the table now.
Well, I don't necessarily see Araghchi's comments as saying it's off the table. I see him as actually realistically circumscribing the ability to actually get a good deal. And this should be a wake-up call to both the new Trump administration as well as some who I would say bad faith actors who are trying to take advantage of the administration's preference for a deal and for a peaceful resolution to this crisis to basically supplicate to the Iranians. So here I think Iranian ideology, Iranian factional politics, and basically the rough and tumble of politics in the Islamic Republic is actually limiting the room for maneuver that the Iranian diplomatic team is going to have. So if anything, now is the time to not take this bait, not take this trap, and to double down on more pressure.
Ben, if we take a step back and look more broadly at how Iran is dealing with a terrible few months, the stunning collapse of its proxy network, it's lost its ally in Syria in the form of Bashar al-Assad, it's now got a very hostile President Trump in the White House. I mean, what is their strategy, do you think? What is their outlook for the year ahead?
Well, there's a Persian saying, which is to wait until the donkey crosses over to the other end of the bridge. So they're prioritizing. What they're trying to do is to tempt the Trump administration with some kind of talks, because talks would at least signal resolve to the domestic population, which is more upset than ever before. Talks would at least make it harder for the Israelis to go after Iranian nuclear and military installations. And talks would force the Americans and the Europeans to have to come to some kind of a lesser or least common denominator approach to Iran that isn't maximum pressure, but that is focused on some kind of diplomatic outcome here. So the Islamic Republic is trying to use the West, in particular the administration's preference for a deal, as a shield against it to not solve the problems it faces at home and abroad, but to merely limp along and outlive the Trump administration.
Great. Thanks for sharing your insights, Ben, and we appreciate it. Ben Tellablou there at the FTD.
Thank you.
Something of a boost for trade between Israel and the United Arab Emirates now. The Emirati-based technology group Edge is to buy a 30% stake in Israel's Third Eye Systems. That's a developer of AI-based driven systems which can detect drone threats. The deal must first be approved by Israel's Defense Ministry. Third Eye develops fully automated systems which detect fast-evolving threats on the battlefield like UAVs and enemy drones, something that has become more significant in the last year. Well, let's get more on that with our Dubai correspondent, Bastien Bory. He joins us now. Bastien, so, I mean, Israel has clearly made a great deal of progress when it comes to this kind of technology in the past year. Is this a sign that the UAE is keen to get in there and get a slice of this market?
Beyond, indeed, the purely commercial aspect of this agreement between the Emiratis and the Israelis, I think what Abu Dhabi is looking for, first and foremost, is to create joint ventures with Israel and then get technology transfers in return. And this is proof that, indeed, the EU is investing a significant amount not only in purely technology, but also in training its military personnel, particularly through American, Chinese, Korean, and now Israeli-based programs. They have also begun developing their own education capability through the establishment of a national defense college, for instance, some time ago. And outside their borders, they are trying to gain experience and greater operational experience in operating with in various environments, like conducting drills with China, sometimes with Korea, as well as signing contracts with the US and Israel.
And what does this tell us then, Bastien, about the broader trading relationship between the UAE and Israel? Because there had been some concern that it was cooling off over the past year.
We can link this conversation with Naftali Bennett's visit today in the UAE, because he held a series of meetings, not only with MBZ, but also with some leaders of the Emirati economy. With this free trade agreement that came into force, bilateral trade jumped by 100% to reach $2.5 billion in 2022 compared to 1.2 the previous year, making the Emiratis the 16th trading partners of the Israelis still today in 2025, with, among other things, some good news for expats, for instance, of both countries, who from now on will just need to show their original driving license, and they will be issued a new driving license of the country, either Israel or the UAE. May sound anecdotal, but it's not. plus this free trade pact, which was signed 2 years ago after 2 years after the signing of the Abraham Accords, now allows both countries to lower and even eliminate customs barriers on around 95 or 96% of traded products. So Bennett was Minister of Economy in Israel 10 years ago, and now in 2025, the UAE is trying to piggyback on that.
A different story for Lebanon, however. We're hearing that a senior Emirati businessman has decided to cancel all of his investments in Lebanon, citing the ongoing instability there.
What Emirati business leaders like this guy are trying to do is to put pressure, first and foremost, on the new Lebanese leadership. Lebanon is a country where the influence of the UAE is sort of declining. Until a few years ago, Abu Dhabi still had a pretty strong hold there via the Hariri family, the big Sunni family that pretty much monopolized power in Beirut for several decades. But Rafik Hariri and his son Saad are not in a position of power anymore. So Mohammed bin Zayed, as well as Mohammed bin Salman, both the Emirati and Saudi leaders, are using these opportunities to advance their pawns and put pressure on Beirut to create, or at least try to create, a stable financial environment for future investments.
Interesting. Thank you very much, Bastien Bory there in Dubai.
Good evening.
A quick word from you, Yaakov, on that, because that is a positive sign, isn't it, that the Emiratis are still willing to invest in Israel?
Extremely. I mean, not only did this relationship survive and continue to do very well despite going down a notch in terms of public profile, but absolutely it shows that the relationship remains interest-based, good. And let's remember that in 2022, the Emiratis purchased, according to reports, Rafael's Drone Dome laser protection system against drones. So this has already precedent. And it looks to me like the relationship is really based on a common perception of threats and what the region should look like. This is the glue that creates real strategic allies.
OK, thank you very much. Well, we're going to take a very short break. When we come back, UNRWA has called it disastrous. It is having to close its offices and get out of Jerusalem after an Israeli law banning the group's activities in Israel came into effect. We'll have more on that for you after the break. I'll be speaking to Hillel Neuer at UN Watch. Don't miss that. Stay with us.
Bad posture. The ever-increasing hours we spend sitting, working, and even while trying to relax at home is twisting our vertebrae out of alignment and creating strain and pain on muscles, ligaments, and joints. A scientifically designed spine and back support device that uses precision biometric technology to perfectly align the back and spine for all-day comfort and support, creating perfect posture for your back every time you sit down. Now features extra-wide acupressure comfort pads as well as an extended height back panel for even more support, making it perfect for all body types. Also features a precision wing design that perfectly cradles your back and spine with amazing ergonomic support that leaves you feeling refreshed and energized even after sitting all day.
You live in Israel or you are preparing for your Aliyah? Congratulations. You have a smartphone? Perfect. Download the Olim app for free and discover everything we have to offer. Booking medical and administrative appointments, bills paying, debt verification, instant translation, contractor recommendation, request tracking, and much more. And if you can't manage it on your own, our team speaks your language and assists you with all your procedures in Israel, starting from 199 shekels per month, unlimited and for the whole family. Don't hesitate any longer. Download the app or contact us.
דניאלה, לירי, נעמה וקרינה.
לירי, חיים שלי! עם הכלבייה.
Introducing the brand new I24 News Video on Demand app.
You'll have instant access to all our programs, reports, in-depth discussions, and expert commentary.
Whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the I24 News Video on Demand app today.
Welcome back. UNRWA, the UN agency which provides services for the descendants of Palestinian refugees, is shutting their office in Jerusalem after a law came into effect which bans them from operating in Israeli territory. The agency provides schooling and healthcare to thousands of people. Some UNRWA employees took part in the October 7 massacre, and UNRWA facilities have been used to hide hostages, weapons and Hamas infrastructure in Gaza. Well, Israel says the organisation is staffed by people who have ties to or who openly support terrorist groups like Hamas. UNRWA has slammed the move and called it disastrous. Here's the group's director speaking at the UN earlier today.
Mr. President, the Knesset legislation defies resolution of this Council and the General Assembly. It flouts the ruling of the International Court of Justice. It disregards that UNRWA is a mechanism established by the General Assembly to provide assistance to Palestinian refugees pending a political answer to the question of Palestine. Implementing the legislations makes a mockery of international law and imposes massive constraints on UNRWA's operation.
Well, the US envoy to the UN has called that an overreaction and says that UNRWA is exaggerating. Well, here to talk about all of that, we're joined by Hillel Neuer. He's the executive director of the group United Nations Watch. Thank you very much for being with us, Hillel. Good to see you again. So, I mean, we've all seen the evidence, and you yourself have provided extensive evidence about UNRWA's activities and how they are infiltrated by terrorists and terrorist supporters. But realistically, how does kicking them out of Jerusalem make Israel safer?
Well, look, first I want to say that from the clip you just showed, the U.S. Chargé d'Affaires, there's not yet the ambassador, Elise Stefanik has not yet had her appointment confirmed, but the U.S. Chargé d'Affaires at the UN called UNRWA statement an exaggeration. Incidentally, this is the same U.S. diplomat who was ambassador to Lebanon and who was visiting UNRWA just a few years ago and funding them and praising them. So clearly in Washington, there's a new sheriff in town. Second, you asked about what does the new law achieve. Look, in 48 hours, Laura, UNRWA activities will cease to exist in Israel. In particular, this means Jerusalem. Primarily, this sends a message. It sends a message that Israel is no longer supporting UNRWA in any way and understands that UNRWA is not the solution, it is the problem. UNRWA is not the firefighter, UNRWA is the pyromaniac. It's setting the fires.
Now, as I say, you yourself have painstakingly put together all of this evidence about the activities, the nefarious activities of UNRWA employees, and you've taken it to the UN. And what kind of response have you had?
Well, you know, we've been doing this for 10 years now. Beginning in August 2015, we sent warnings and detailed reports to UNRWA. Typically, these were screenshots of UNRWA teachers, school principals, and other employees in Gaza, in Lebanon, and elsewhere who openly called to slaughter Jews, praised Adolf Hitler, supported Hamas, and praised Hamas terrorism as glorious martyrdom operations. The immediate reaction, Laura, from August 2015 until today has been to attack us, to defame us as opposing Palestinian refugees. It has been the very opposite of being interested in rooting out the infiltration of Hamas members, Hamas leaders, and Hamas supporters in their ranks. We know that the leaders of the teachers' unions in Lebanon and Gaza were Hamas terror chiefs. I couldn't make this up if I wanted to. The head of the UNRWA Teachers Union in Gaza, Souheil Al-Hindi, is on the Hamas Politburo in Gaza. He's one of the planners of the October 7th massacre. The leader of UNRWA's Teachers Union in Lebanon, Fathi Sharif, until his untimely death in September from an IDF missile, was the head of Hamas in Lebanon. The leaders of UNRWA education in Lebanon and Gaza were the leaders of Hamas. And UNRWA never was interested in this at all. They allowed it to be infiltrated. All they did was attack us from time to time under extreme US pressure. At certain moments, they gave a slap on the wrist to individuals. But Laura, it was never more than that. It was all denial, cover up, and attacking the messenger.
Yeah, and I see that you yourself have taken some pretty vicious attacks from UN staff who seem to be absolutely apoplectic with rage about your work.
That's right. You know, we just called out a UN rapporteur, the health rapporteur. Her name is Tlaleng Mofokeng from South Africa. And we called her out, and then she saw that I was opposing UNRWA. She called me an evil scum, white man, bastard. Among other things, she's someone who routinely spouts expletive-filled tirades and obscenities. She used a four-letter word against Israel's prime minister, which she was forced to delete. So that's the kind of, you get attacked for speaking out against terrorist leaders who run the education systems. That's the response that we get. Also, I should mention Rapporteur, the infamous Francesca Albanese, who used to work at UNRWA. And it was in a fundraising, let's not forget, it was in a fundraising letter that she wrote, posted online in the summer of 2014, when she said, America is subjugated by the Jewish lobby. That was a letter she wrote to fundraise for UNRWA, which she sent to her family priest, Monsignor Antonio Blundo, in her town of Ariano Irpino in Italy. So UNRWA employees, UNRWA supporters are open anti-Semites in numerous important cases.
Well, people around the world might be looking at this and saying, okay, fair enough, UNRWA is clearly doing a terrible job. But what about all those thousands of people who depend on UNRWA for their education, for their healthcare and all the rest of it? What is the alternative?
Well, in Jerusalem, let's break it down. In Jerusalem, there's only a small UNRWA facility in a place called Shuafat, in a neighborhood of Jerusalem. Jerusalem takes care of, I think, 800,000 students, or hundreds of thousands of students, Jewish and Arab, so they will easily be able to accommodate those students in existing facilities that Israel has in Jerusalem for Arab students, the same with the medical system. So that's the easy part. Of course, in Gaza, for example, Israel has not outlawed UNRWA in Gaza. Israeli law does not apply in Gaza. So UNRWA can continue to run in Gaza, but it's going to be harder because the international individuals will have a harder time getting visas. They're only 1% of the UNRWA staff. 99% are locals. So they're going to continue working. UNRWA's continuing to send them money. What we're going to see, in my opinion, Laura, is a gradual handover of services to other agencies. And, the Guterres said, UNRWA is irreplaceable. Well, that's absurd. I'm speaking to you from Geneva, across the street from the UN Refugee Agency. When there's a crisis, whether it's in Ethiopia or Sudan, Ukraine, Syria, tens of millions of people need food and other aid. The UN system shows up within weeks. They have numerous major UN agencies, UNHCR, UNDP, World Health Organization, UNICEF for children, many large relief NGO organizations, and they're able to handle millions of people in huge swaths of territory that are the size of France and larger. The idea that other agencies cannot replace UNRWA in Gaza, which is a tiny strip of land with only 2 million people, is absurd. All the other agencies, like the World Food Program, are already carrying much of the burden from the past year. More of them can take the burden. And to quote Dr. Einat Wilf, the world expert on UNRWA, what will replace UNRWA? It ought to be Palestinian responsibility. The Palestinians don't need 7 decades of being in dependency and being brought up on resentment and hate. They can manage their own affairs. If they could build hundreds of miles of terror tunnels, they can build facilities for food, for medicine, for schools. They can run them, manage themselves, and that's really what ought to be happening in the long term.
Hillel, we appreciate it. I know you're a very busy man. Hillel Neuer at United Nations Watch. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laura.
Yakov Lapin is with me in the studio. I mean, UNRWA, has multiple problems. Do you think the world is waking up to the fact that it is infiltrated by terrorists, but also that it is not good for Palestinians, essentially?
I don't know about the world, but certainly the Trump administration seems to be very awake to that. And that's good news, I think, for Israel and also for the future of Gazans, because UNRWA, as Hillel said so eloquently just now, was part of the conflict preservation mechanism. It was its whole role was invested in basically preserving the conflict status of the Gaza Strip and the various Palestinians that it was so-called looking after. And sure, it was a convenient sort of band-aid, even for the Israeli government up until the 7th of October. Even the Israeli government and the Israeli defense establishment viewed it as a convenient band-aid. But it turns out that this was a very toxic band-aid. Not only was it completely infiltrated by Hamas in Gaza, but also, its entire reason for being was to ensure the status quo does not change. And I think now that we've had such a major war in the area, the rules of the game have to start changing in the post-war era, and doing away with UNRWA and its toxic role has to be one of the first items on the agenda.
Okay, thank you. Well, Saudi Arabia is to allow non-Saudis to invest in companies which in turn invest in real estate in Mecca and Medina. Millions of pilgrims flock to these cities every year for the Hajj, earning a hefty income for hotels and other services. Non-Muslims will now be able to profit indirectly, but a ban on non-Muslims owning property in the two holiest sites in Islam remains in place. More in this report.
Saudi Arabia isn't finished showing the world its cards just yet. In a significant move, the kingdom has now opened Mecca and Medina to foreign investments. On Monday, Saudi Arabia said that foreigners are now allowed to invest in Saudi-listed companies that own property in Mecca and Medina, Islam's two holiest cities, something that would have been unheard of just some time ago. But for years now, Saudi Arabia has been advancing vast reforms attempting at diversifying the economy in different ways. In this case, the move signals Saudi Arabia's will to make the kingdom more appealing to increase investments, but also to strengthen the local market in the region and internationally. On a yearly basis, Mecca welcomes millions of Muslim pilgrims and is currently undergoing a massive redevelopment in order to draw 30 million by 2030, a part of a plan that the Saudi government has dubbed Saudi Vision 2030. Given the fact that non-Muslims aren't allowed to enter the holy cities, allowing for foreign investments seems to suddenly open the doors, especially for the Middle East's largest economy. In the meantime, Saudi Arabia still has to tackle some other issues, and notably one that both the US and Israel would like to see come to fruition. After a year of war between Hamas and Israel in the Gaza Strip, talks for normalizing ties between Israel and the kingdom have stalled over the issue of a Palestinian state.
Well, with us now, Simon Henderson is the director of the Gulf and Energy Policy Programme at the Washington Institute. Good to see you again, Simon. Thank you for joining us. What is the significance of this move, opening up the holiest sites in Islam to investment from the outside world? And is there a risk, do you think, of a backlash here?
The attraction is to get other people other than Saudis to invest in the kingdom. The kingdom, as your report referred to, has got a huge economic program in action. It's called Vision 2030, but requires, apart from investment by Saudi Arabia itself, also investment by non-Saudis from abroad. And this is one of the examples of what they're allowing to happen. Of course, in strict economic terms, they want the Saudis, and particularly MBS Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, want investment in projects, industrial projects and infrastructure projects. But for the Saudis, Mecca and Medina are a core part of their existence. And so to attract investment there as well is logical. And perhaps if there's a danger of domestic backlash to what Mohammed bin Salman wants to do in terms of modernizing the kingdom, this direction, the Muslim holy sites, is a way of perhaps undermining or certainly deflecting political opposition to him for what he's trying to do across the nation.
So it's quite a gamble in some respects. It could provoke a backlash. Just in terms of this pragmatic approach that the Saudis are going for, and of course they're trying to diversify their economy away from fossil fuels. Do you think that means that normalisation with Israel is now just a matter of time?
Well, it is just a matter of time, but we could discuss endlessly what time. And there was a time a couple of years ago when it seemed almost imminent. But October 7th happened, attitudes have changed. And the degree to which the Saudis want a acknowledgement of or a move in the direction of a Palestinian state has probably increased, almost certainly increased. Maybe MBS, the Crown Prince, is still happy with the idea of normalization, but he can't get too far ahead of his people.
Simon, great to talk to you. Thank you for your insight. Simon Henderson there at the Washington Institute. Well, Turkey's government, meanwhile, is hoping to reach a $6 billion defence deal with Saudi Arabia. Turkish sources claim the kingdom wants to buy warships, tanks and missiles. Turkey has been ramping up its defence industry and has secured major contracts with several European countries and Ukraine. A deal with Saudi Arabia would help Turkey secure a foothold in the Middle East. Well, with me now, Dr. Hayatan Kohen-Yanarocak is a Turkey expert at the Moshe Dayan Center, correct?
Correct.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Always good to see you. It's been a pretty successful few months for Turkey in many ways, given the situation in Syria. But in terms of their homegrown defense industry, that does seem to be making great strides as well.
Indeed. As you already mentioned, they made a very successful venture, especially in Ukraine, and also let us also not forget another arena, the Nagorno-Karabakh. These two arenas provided them new clients, especially in Africa. They are mostly focusing in Africa because the client states, all of these African states who are using these UAVs against kind of guerrilla groups, these UAVs are providing a very efficient Bayraktar. Yes, because the guerrilla groups, they lack electronic warfare devices, so it is very hard for them to take down these Bayraktars. And there is another huge plus. Turkey is not asking any questions regarding the human rights. Why did you use that? Who did you kill? Okay, these are very important questions. And when the provider is not asking these kind of questions and the price of the UAVs are relatively cheaper than the American or the Israeli ones who ask questions, okay, so you tend to choose the Turkish ones. But it's not only that. We are also seeing the Turkish defense industry. They are also producing the frigates, corvettes. They have their own indigenous program called the Milgem, which is the short term for the national warship. So they already dispatched, for instance, some corvettes to Pakistan, for instance. And as we already heard in your report, that they're also eager to provide them to Saudi Arabia.
Right. Well, what specifically is interesting about this deal with Saudi Arabia? How will that benefit Turkey strategically if it has this deal?
This is something very symbolic. Let me remind you, the two countries had a very severe political crisis because of the Khashoggi affair, the Saudi journalist who was killed in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, and the Turkish authorities then proved the connection between the kingdom and the murder. But later, we all witnessed that the Saudis and the Turks mended their fences when the Turkish Justice Ministry gave all the files to the Saudi Justice Ministry, and they closed everything. I mean,
Erdogan was furious.
Erdogan, because they gravely needed investments, and therefore it was a gradual. It was a gradual move. So, in my opinion, the current deal is symbolizing a new era in the relations, and of course, it's a huge success for the Turkish defense industry, which turned into a very important source of income for the Turkish treasury.
How do you think the Americans will and how should they react to this?
Well, NATO, we have a common denominator called NATO. Turkey is considered as a member of NATO.
Second biggest military in NATO.
Indeed.
Right?
And therefore, Americans cannot object, at least on paper, for such a deal, because United States and Turkey, at least on paper, are considered as allies. But on the other hand, of course, we can speak about a new provider, and this will deepen the rivalry in the market. And because of the Turks, maybe the prices may go down. So this will turn into a sweet sour rivalry between Turkey and the United States. But I don't think that it will create a friction between the two states because of Saudi Arabia.
Oh, fascinating. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Do you think that that's a worry for Israel?
Well, the sale to the Saudis, not necessarily so. It makes sense that the Saudis will want to diversify their imports, especially after, they found themselves on the wrong end of an arms embargo by the United States in the past. And I don't think they're going to forget that so quickly. But from an Israeli perspective, what we do have to keep an eye on is, first of all, the Turkish missile industry is advancing. Erdogan announced a couple of weeks ago that they're going to have a missile with a 2,000-kilometer range. They've got the Typhoon missile, which is under development. They've got a second missile called the Senk, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Cenk, thank you.
And Bora.
And there's also a cruise missile under development. Now, these are missiles that even in a sort of hint could be used to try and intimidate Israel. And when you take into consideration the fact that Turkey now has actual proxies in Syria, which I don't think would receive these kinds of missiles, but perhaps UAVs, tactical UAVs, perhaps rockets. I think this is a situation we have to keep under very close monitoring, and messages probably should be sent from Jerusalem to Turkey saying what the red lines are in terms of weapons going into Syria. I think this would be a good time for that kind of messaging.
And just real quick on that note, we had Israel's defense minister in the Golan today saying Israel will be staying in these positions for the time being.
Right, and I think this is one of the main reasons. We don't really know which militia is going to be heading south towards the Israeli border. It's still chaotic. So the Shiite axis may have left Syria's soil largely, but now there's a new bloc, a Sunni bloc, and let's remember, Erdogan's ideology is Islamist, it's neo-Ottoman. Sure, he knows how to juggle economic and international needs, but now he's got arms in Syria, and those arms have to be watched.
Jacob, hi Tad, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Both of you. Well, Turkey on the up, Russia going down in influence, it seems, in the region. But a Russian delegation was in Damascus earlier for the first time since the downfall of Bashar al-Assad, the deputy foreign minister and the Kremlin's special envoy for Syria, trying to negotiate the future of Moscow's two military bases there. There's a naval facility in Tartus and an air base near the port city of Latakia. And without Tartus, Russia has no access to the Mediterranean Sea. Well, to talk more about that, we're joined by Anna Boshkovskaya. She's a senior fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Good to have you with us, Anna. Thank you for joining us. Will Russia then be able to keep these two very strategic bases? And do they have a plan B, as it were, if they can't?
Great to be on your show as always. Thank you for having me. Well, we don't know. We'll have to wait and see what comes out of this visit. But it is possible, certainly, that Russia will get to keep some sort of a limited presence in Syria. Certainly, the fact that the drawdown that we've seen thus far has been fairly orderly. It wasn't chaotic. Even at the time, suggested that the Russian government had some types of security guarantees. But keep in mind also that Russia moved a number of its assets to Libya. And Libya offers a bit more than Tartus. It offers a deep water port access. So Russia is not completely out of the Eastern Mediterranean one way or the other.
So do you think that might be a long-term strategy to gradually move out of Syria?
Well, it would certainly appear that way. Well, first, I think the long-term strategy is still to retain some sort of presence in Syria. So let me back that up a little bit. I think the Russian government has been essentially trying to do damage control ever since Assad's fall. And the current regime in Damascus, for what it's worth, for practical considerations, has reasons for wanting to have some sort of a relationship with Russia too. So on both sides, there's interest, and Russia is not completely out of Syria. But as far as Libya, this is another key post where Russia historically has been searching for access, much like as it has been in Syria, and Russia has had a presence here in this region. Really together, Tartus in Syria together with Libya offer almost like an arc of influence across the Eastern Mediterranean. But lastly, let me just add, with everyone watching for the future of Russia's military presence in Syria, I would be interested in any potential discussion of Russia's commercial presence in Syria, because here too, Russia retains a foothold. And it's possible that while everybody's watching the military bases, Russia could be quietly negotiating some sort of a commercial presence. And I think that's important to watch.
What kind of commercial interest?
Well, Russia had control of Syria's oil fields. Russia had a stake in the phosphate industry and telecommunications. So I would be looking at these and potentially other sectors as well.
Interesting. Thank you very much indeed, Anna. Anna Boshkovskaya there at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Thank you to all my guests, Yakov Lapin, Hayatan Cohen-Yanarotic. Thank you to you. And do stay with us here on I24 News. Nicole Zedek will be up next with tonight's rundown. But from me and the team, thanks for watching and good night.
Started on October 7th, but for many, the horror may never end. With homes destroyed, families displaced, hostages missing, soldiers fallen, and a country traumatized. In the first year alone, more than 17,000 Israelis have been wounded, and hundreds of thousands have experienced psychological trauma and need support now. Thankfully, for 112 years, Hadassah hospitals have been on the ground healing. At our expanding Gandel Rehabilitation Center, we're providing critical physical therapy and life-changing mental health services.
Hadassah is a great place.
Now, some are back home, living their lives, but many more still need our help. Help your family and friends heal at Hadassah hospitals. Give today.
This innovative tool is the Fat Freezer Platinum, the first home-use fat reduction device that freezes away stubborn fat.
Like most people, I always believed that diet and exercise would be enough to reduce stubborn fat.
The Fat Freezer Platinum uses technology to freeze away stubborn fat from the comfort of your own home. To optimize results, the Fat Freezer Platinum uses TheraLight. The Fat Freezer Platinum will help you sculpt your body in exactly the way you want and keep it that way. It's safe, simple to use, and bottom line is, it really works. The Fat Freezer uses a medically known technology called cryolipolysis, used in high-end clinics all across the globe.
דניאלה, לירי, נעמה וקרינה.
לירי, חיים שלי! אמא כלבייה.
Tens of thousands of Gazans have been moving back north as the IDF withdraws from parts of the Netzarim corridor, raising concern for Israeli residents near the border. U.S. President Donald Trump says America will soon have an Iron Dome air defense system just like Israel's. We bring you the latest out of Washington. Family members fear for the condition of the remaining hostages, as Hamas says 8 of the 26 set to be released in phase 1 of the ceasefire are dead. Our correspondent is standing by at Bellinson Hospital with the details. This is the rundown on I-24 News. I'm Nicole Zedek. Thanks for joining us this evening. And for the second day in a row, herds of Gazans are returning back north, past the Netzarim corridor for the first time in more than a year. But despite the massive images of these crowds returning and Hamas claiming more than 300,000 Gazans moved back, the IDF says that's an exaggeration. They put the current estimate closer to tens of thousands rather than hundreds. However, the IDF is no longer there to check who is moving back, as troops withdrew from most of the Netzarim corridor under the terms of the ceasefire. Now, Egyptian contractors, along with a U.S. firm, are reportedly conducting security checks on any vehicles traveling north along the Salah al-Din road. But for those traveling on foot along Rashid Street near the beach, there's no checks. This is raising major fears for some Israelis who live along the border with Gaza. Here's what some of them had to say.
My brother was murdered on October 7th. I live with my family right there, and the terrorists were on the street. We were locked inside the house. And where did they come from? From northern Gaza. So now we are back to the same situation, more or less. We have loads of Gazans, and within them loads of terrorists, and we're back to the same situation. That we are not safe, we don't know what is going to happen. Maybe there are still tunnels that were not found, and they can use them to enter Israel again and commit another massacre. And this is sad. It's very sad.
Everything that happened on October 7th at this moment, when they let Hamas terrorists back to northern Gaza, will repeat itself. Hamas says a year. It won't be a year. They will choose the date.
For more, I am joined in studio now by Lieutenant Colonel in Reserves Jonathan Conricus, former international spokesman for the IDF, as well as a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Jonathan, great to have you out in the rundown as always.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Right now, we just heard from some of these Israeli residents near the Gaza border, specifically Sderot, a town right near the north of the Gaza Strip, where right now tens of thousands of Gazans are returning to. They can see this happening pretty much across the border from their homes, some of them. And so these security fears that some of these residents have, are they valid, or are the security checkpoints inside Gaza enough?
The way I see it, the fears of Israeli civilians living in the Gaza envelope, not only Sderot, but all around the area, they unfortunately are valid. And it's not so much about whether or not Gazans are in northern Gaza or not, but whether or not Hamas continues to govern and to have control over what happens in Gaza. That's the real issue, whether civilians have been able to go north and Hamas terrorists have been going with them. It makes a difference, but that is not the strategic picture. The strategic issue is is Hamas still in power, and does anybody check their power? And in the future, will they have the ability to regain weapons? That is a concern for Israeli civilians, and until Israel creates a different reality where Hamas isn't in control of the Gaza Strip, then, rightfully so, Israeli civilians will have serious concerns about their safety.
How does this move also complicate possibly Israel's maneuvers inside Gaza if phase 2 of the ceasefire, which is this complete end of the war, if that collapses and Israel does have to go back in with military force inside Gaza, now that they've withdrawn from parts of the Netzarim corridor, now that civilians are back in the northern part of the Strip, which they had evacuated and cleared out for months now, what type of groundwork does this leave for the IDF if they have to go back?
Well, out of the many things that are very complicated with conducting combat operations in Gaza, that I think is a little bit less complicated because for a few reasons. One, a lot of the infrastructure in the northern part of Gaza is non-existent, so there is not much to cling on to in northern Gaza. Second thing is that these people have been evacuated from northern Gaza once or twice. Doing it the third time wouldn't be a very difficult endeavor. And another factor is that there already is humanitarian infrastructure in place in the southern part of Gaza, in the Muassi area. And if it comes to it, and if negotiations fail, if Hamas refuses to hand over Israeli hostages for whatever reason, and if Israel has to resort back to fighting, then I think Israel would have the ability and hopefully the legitimacy to do so in order to retake control over that area and perhaps once and for all really deal a decisive blow against Hamas.
Jonathan, you mentioned briefly just what these Gazans are returning to. It's rubble most of the time, yet compared to the south where these humanitarian zones have actually been built, where they have been living in tent cities, albeit, but in the north, what are they returning to? Because right now, without money, without the infrastructure to rebuild, the situation for these Gazans, it's not much up there.
No, I mean, the Hamas's military infrastructure was the most elaborate and the most important and the strongest in the northern part of the Gaza Strip. And Hamas combat capabilities were focused in Gaza City, Sajaiya, Jabalia, and many other communities and neighborhoods that are part of the northern part of the Gaza Strip. As such, there was more fighting there, and as a direct consequence, there is more destruction of infrastructure and dwellings. That's, the destruction that Hamas brought upon the Gaza Strip. That is the reason why the civilians there now face a very dire situation. I wouldn't be surprised to see a movement which Hamas won't show on TV screens, but perhaps we'll be able to see it with other means, of a reverse movement of Gazans that have come to the northern part of Gaza. They see that there's not much there. There's maybe a heap of dust and cement, which used to be their home. And they understand that if they want to care for their family, maybe the better place for them to be is in a humanitarian zone in the southern part of Gaza, or maybe take President Trump's initiative and go elsewhere.
And we're going to talk about that right now, in fact, because U.S. President Donald Trump, he is doubling down on this push for Egypt and Jordan to take in Gazans, suggesting Palestinians would be better off somewhere not, quote, associated with violence. Here's more.
Well, I'd like to get them living in an area where they can live without disruption and revolution and violence so much as when you look at the Gaza Strip, it's been hell for so many years. And it just seems to me there's been various civilizations on that strip, It didn't start here. It started thousands of years before. And there's always been violence associated with it. So I think you can get people living in areas that are a lot safer and maybe a lot better and maybe a lot more comfortable.
Reiterating statements made to journalists on Sunday about the relocation of Palestinians in Gaza to Egypt and Jordan, the U.S. president insisted on Monday that the two leaders would be on board with the idea. Meanwhile, Egypt denies reports that President Sisi has spoken with Trump, and both Egypt and Jordan have come out strongly against Trump's idea, saying that Palestinians should be allowed to remain in Gaza.
Our stance that the two-state solution is the path to achieving peace is firm and unwavering. Our rejection of displacement is also firm and unwavering.
2 days after President Trump's statement and his phone call with Jordan's King Abdullah, Secretary of State Marco Rubio held a separate call with the Jordanian monarch. Rubio thanked King Abdullah for his support of the ceasefire, but made no reference to Trump's remarks on relocating the civilians in Gaza. Senior Hamas official Mohammed Nazal dismissed Trump's comments as, quote, very strange, adding that the Palestinian people who paid with their blood in exchange for steadfastness on their land will not leave Gaza.
I think this dramatic statement from President Trump came in order to try to rescue Netanyahu from sinking in the sands of Gaza, because apparently Netanyahu has a big political dilemma with the day after of this war. I think that the Palestinians in Gaza and in the West Bank and everywhere, together with the Jordanians and the Egyptians, will definitely reject this proposal.
When asked if this stance means he no longer believes in a two-state solution, Trump avoided answering directly, saying he'll be discussing the issue with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu when he comes to Washington to meet him in the not-so-distant future.
For the latest, we are joined now by our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim, at the U.S. State Department. Mike, right now, Trump is doubling down on these comments. And so what is the reaction, however, coming out of the United States? Because these are controversial comments specifically here in the Middle East, but what about there in America?
Well, first off, we just mentioned the not too distant future that Trump said he'd be meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu. It's not too distant at all. The Prime Minister's office in Jerusalem just announcing that meeting will take place this coming Tuesday, February the 4th. I just asked the Israeli embassy here in D.C. if they can confirm any other meetings with State Department, Congress. They said not yet, but it's in the works. So again, Tuesday will be the White House meeting between Trump and Netanyahu, according to the Prime Minister's office in Jerusalem. The reaction here, as you asked about those comments from President Trump related to the relocation, short-term, medium-term, long-term, forever term of residents in Gaza, it's mainly come from the Arab sector here in the United States. The leader of the Arab Americans for Trump group, which said that they helped President Trump to a victory in Michigan and got out the vote in other Arab heavy areas of the country in the November election. The leader of that group says that he categorically rejects those statements from Donald Trump related to the relocation of Gazans elsewhere, that it's essentially a non-starter, that it's not feasible, it's not realistic, and it will not lead to the two-state solution that the Arab Americans for Trump group thought was a part of the quote-unquote contract. Those are the leaders of that group's words, not mine. The contract that they had with Donald Trump in order to secure their vote back in November. We've heard from no Jewish groups per se about those comments from President Trump as of yet, but Arab Americans for Trump, which purports to represent the Arab American supporters of Trump here in the U.S., say no, they don't agree with those statements and that principle at all that Trump laid out yesterday.
Mike, now that we have a date for that meeting between Netanyahu and Trump, this is happening within Trump's 2 weeks in the White House. So what should we make about maybe the significance of this timing and any details that we have about what the two might discuss?
Well, some of those things are self-evident, Nicole, in what they will discuss. The ceasefire, how to progress with it to a second stage, the broader U.S.-Israel bilateral relationship, shipments of weapons to Israel, which Trump said he freed up via an executive order. I think these will be at the top of the agenda in terms of Trump and Netanyahu. But at a broader perspective, can the Abraham Accords be advanced in some sense? Will Trump apply additional pressure to Netanyahu as he did in terms of getting the ceasefire to other areas, in terms of carrying over the ceasefire? What will Trump try to extract? What will the prime minister try to extract from the president in terms of security vis-a-vis Iran, any American actions toward the IRGC and other Iranian bodies? These will be, I think, the broad contours of the meeting coming up on Tuesday. The significance, well, Netanyahu will be the first foreign leader that Trump will meet in his second term. And obviously, with everything that's at stake right now in terms of the ceasefire, the hostage release, the insecurity related to the Palestinian security prisoner release, this will all be manifest in the meeting coming up on Tuesday between Trump and Netanyahu.
Sounds like a big meeting. Lots on the agenda there that we will certainly be covering. Senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim joining us from the State Department. Thanks for the update. And coming back here in studio, still with me, Lieutenant Colonel in Reserves Jonathan Conriquez. Jonathan, we were discussing it right before, this migration of Gazans inside Gaza from south to north, maybe back to south. But what about the relocation of them abroad? How realistic and feasible is this solution that Trump is touting?
Well, it's not new. I mean, it's been around for, shall we say, at least 50 years in certain circles of Israeli political thought, and probably in other countries as well. I think the biggest opposition will be from people who are set and determined on putting Palestinian statehood in front of the needs of Palestinians. And we've seen many countries and political institutions over the years do exactly this. UNRWA is an example of a political institution that allegedly is there to help Palestinians, but really what they've done over 7 years is to cement and to perpetuate a state of vulnerability and misery for Palestinians. So had it been about helping Palestinians, then there would have been so many other ways of really doing it. And of course, you know, asking people to, or insinuating people that they should leave what they call home is a very, very big deal, and it's a very big psychological thing. It, of course, has tremendous economic repercussions and probably diplomatic as well. Will Gazans agree to it? Very doubtful. But I think this is part of the behind the scenes between Israel and the US, part of the deal. I think that after it's now been announced that Prime Minister Netanyahu is coming to the US, the price for each of the remaining hostage just went up, because I think Hamas can take from that and understand that there's going to be severe pressure on Israel on behalf of the US to continue and to get a final deal done. Hamas knows that, and they will bargain hard, and I think that we will see a rise in the price of for every Israeli hostage. But perhaps there will be additional pressure on Hamas as well. And there's always more up the sleeves of seasoned politicians, and we will see interesting things, no doubt.
Always more happening behind these closed doors, it seems. We're going to stick with news out of the United States, though, because President Trump is also looking to replicate Israel's Iron Dome air defense system for the United States. And in line with his America First policy, he says it will also be made in the USA.
I'm directing our new Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, who's going to be great, by the way, to immediately begin the construction of a state-of-the-art Iron Dome missile defense shield, which will be able to protect Americans. You know, we protect other countries, but we don't protect ourselves.
For more, we are joined now by retired Colonel Rich Outzen, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council and Geopolitical Consultant at Dragoman LLC. Rich, a big question right now is exactly why hasn't the United States had a system like this already on its territory?
Well, we can answer that really in two ways. The first is that we kind of have. I mean, the United States has spent over $2 billion helping develop Israel's Iron Dome. We have been engaged in co-production, technology sharing, and of course resupply after October 7th. So in a very real sense, the United States does have certainly a role in Iron Dome and the other systems that have helped to protect Israel. Now, the other part of the question is, why don't we have something similar to that already deployed for our own territory? Well, we don't have the same acute type of threat that Israel faced with regards to the massive rocket and missile short-range arsenals from Hezbollah and Hamas. So that's one reason. But the other thing, and Mexico and Canada are our neighbors, very different from Lebanon and Gaza. But as threats proliferate in the next century, the president's right. We're going to need to develop more sophisticated and layered defensive systems.
So there's been no need for this, you mentioned, in the past. So why exactly now, especially as President Trump says there's going to be no wars, or he doesn't want to see any wars under his watch?
Well, you just have to look at the technology as it moves worldwide. Not only the drones and the fact that small aerial threats, some of them unmanned, and some rockets, but also these mysterious UAVs we've been seeing off the coast in the United States, and potentially as we watch warfare in Russia and Ukraine, masses of sort of kamikaze drones, as they call them. These things are going to become real threats, and they don't have to have massive launching areas. It could be from a submarine. It could be from, say, a group infiltrated south of our border. And so it's becoming technologically much more feasible to do rocket and missile attacks. We also see countries like Russia and China working on advanced technology for very long-range cruise missiles and sort of rockets that can strike from thousands of kilometers away. So, yeah, look, the 2020s are going to be different than the previous decades in the United States. So now is the time that we need to pay attention to that threat and develop our own systems.
Prepare the defenses before the defense systems are needed, it sounds like. Now, Rich, you also mentioned that the United States had been involved and partnered in helping Israel build its air defense system. But right now, Trump says that this new American Iron Dome, it's going to be all American made. And so how much of a partnership do you think that Israel will have in a project like this?
Well, it makes sense for there to be a technological partnership because the two sides have Rafael, Raytheon, and other companies have been involved with sort of developing the technology, the brains, and the circuits behind the missile. So I think with the aerospace technology in Israel in different sectors, we can definitely incorporate that and do some collaboration in that regard. But look, when it comes to American jobs and the Americans bending the metal and putting the pieces together, the president's got a very clear position on that. So this has to be a made in America system. That doesn't mean we won't have some partnerships with Israel and others who have technological pieces of the puzzle.
Interesting news to come out of the United States. Retired Colonel Rich Outzen, thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Now, Israel's ambassador to the United Nations, Danny Danon, says UNRWA has 48 hours to stop all operations in Israel. The Israeli government passed legislation last year outlawing the agency, but the ban only directly covers Israeli territory, and it's still unclear exactly how the law could impact UNRWA's work in the West Bank and specifically Gaza. Here's what Danon told reporters earlier today.
This decision also reflects the reality of the situation that UNRWA has miserably failed in its mandate, and it has failed the people who were supposed to benefit from its services. More precisely, this decision was driven by UNRWA's constant refusal to address the widespread infiltration of its ranks by Hamas and other terrorist organizations. No sovereign state should facilitate the operations of an agency that threatens its national security and blatantly violates its laws.
Now, a U.S. envoy said that they support this decision and that UNRWA is exaggerating the effects that a ban like this could have on the capabilities. Now, as far as this decision, is it actually going to affect UNRWA's ability not only to impact clearly here in Israel, but more specifically Gaza, where we have seen UNRWA violations as well as aid deliveries countless times throughout the course of this war?
So in Judea and Samaria and in eastern Jerusalem, I would assess that that's a definite yes. There will be a significant impact, and that is a first step. UNRWA has had quite a lot of time to reposition and realign their activities accordingly. So has the Palestinian Authority. I don't know how serious they've taken the Israeli legislation, which in my mind is about 60 years overdue or 55 years overdue. But now they're faced with that reality, which finally is happening. The big question about Gaza is, well, UNRWA, if we look into details for the last few months, UNRWA has been less involved in the provision of aid. They themselves have claimed that the issue of safety and hijackings by armed people, they don't name Hamas, but by armed people, has been an issue, and therefore they scaled down their activity in terms of trucks going in and distribution centers, and we have other organizations that have been providing those services. It's not ideal. There are people in Gaza who are reliant on humanitarian aid, and their solutions need to be found for them. UNRWA is definitely not that solution. There is a plethora of other UN and other NGOs that are already active with infrastructure and personnel in Gaza, and there's non-governmental organizations that are from the US and other locations that can go in, scale up, and really do humanitarian aid, but not facilitating terror activity, not providing funds or a front for Hamas, and definitely not providing diplomatic cover for Hamas and what they've been doing.
If some of those other organizations fail to step up, is there any way that a decision like this could backfire on Israel, and Israel has to take responsibility for handling some of that aid deliveries to Gaza?
So I've said this in the past, and I think that there are quite a lot in the Israeli government who are thinking along these lines. I really don't see a different alternative to Israel conducting these operations itself. I don't see a real alternative for Israel. If it really wants to defeat Hamas, if it wants to provide security and safety to Israeli civilians and make sure that Hamas doesn't rearm itself and doesn't prepare for an October 7 style attack in a year or 2 or 3, then what Israel needs to do is to take control over that center of gravity. The distribution of food and the provision of aid to the Palestinian civilians is what keeps Hamas in power. The sooner Israel moves in and takes control of that and actually provides aid to civilians and cuts out Hamas, and that'll be some heavy lifting, but it can be done, that'll be the sooner that Hamas will be defeated.
We have a quick update now out of Israel's northern front, that being Lebanon. Lebanon says 7 people were wounded in an alleged Israeli airstrike in the Nabatia area, which is north of the Litani River. Now, the IDF has not yet commented on the strike, but reports say it targeted a Hezbollah weapons depot. Now, right now, Jonathan, we are still in this extended ceasefire period that was the 60 days set to end earlier this week, but it has been extended over the terms with the United States as well. News like this, unconfirmed, I will add, but still, how could this possibly risk violating or exposing and collapsing the ceasefire in place?
Well, the IDF hasn't, as you said, the IDF hasn't issued anything official yet. We're waiting for notice. I would assume that before Israel struck, notice was given to Americans and French and indirectly to the Lebanese that Hezbollah was violating the ceasefire agreement and was deploying. Nabatia, it's important to understand, it is north of the Litani. It is the biggest city in southern Lebanon, in that area, a massive Hezbollah HQ with lots of underground and above ground facility and lots of Hezbollah operatives and their families who live there. So we're talking about an important operational asset for Hezbollah. It's not a surprise that there appears to have been Hezbollah activity there. And I would assume that there's been preliminary preparations done and ducks in order in terms of Israel, and then a strike on the ground, or perhaps as Israel struck, it notified the different parties. I think Israel would have to strike long and hard in order to really rupture the ceasefire, because Hezbollah is not really in a position to have much of a say about it for the time being.
We'll certainly have to follow these latest developments as we do find more information. Lieutenant Colonel Reserves Jonathan Conriquez, stay with us now, but we are going out for a quick break here on The Rundown. But when we come back, we'll talk more about the latest developments in Syria, with the IDF announcing new temporary, they say, infrastructure being built on the Syrian side of Mount Hermon in the buffer zone. But now with a visit by Defense Minister Israel Katz to that exact area, he says troops will be there indefinitely. We'll dig into it when we come back here on The Rundown. 3 minutes, and we're back.
It started on October 7th, but for many, the horror may never end. With homes destroyed, families displaced, hostages missing, soldiers fallen, and a country traumatized. In the first year alone, more than 17,000 Israelis have been wounded, and hundreds of thousands have experienced psychological trauma and need support now. Thankfully, for 112 years, Hadassah hospitals have been on the ground healing. At our expanding Gandel Rehabilitation Center, we're providing critical physical therapy and life-changing mental health services.
Hadassah is a great place.
Now, some are back home, living their lives, but many more still need our help. Help your family and friends heal at Hadassah hospitals. Give today.
You live in Israel or you are preparing for your Aliyah? Congratulations. You have a smartphone? Perfect. Download the Olim app for free and discover everything we have to offer. booking medical and administrative appointments, bills paying, debt verification, instant translation, contractor recommendation, request tracking, and much more. And if you can't manage it on your own, our team speaks your language and assists you with all your procedures in Israel, starting from 199 shekels per month, unlimited and for the whole family. Don't hesitate any longer. Download the app or contact us.
Bad posture. The ever-increasing hours we spend sitting, working, and even while trying to relax at home is twisting our vertebrae out of alignment and creating strain and pain on muscles, ligaments, and joints. A scientifically designed spine and back support device that uses precision biometric technology to perfectly align the back and spine for all-day comfort and support, creating perfect posture for your back every time you sit down. Now features extra-wide acupressure comfort pads as well as an extended height back panel for even more support, making it perfect for all body types. Also features a precision wing design that perfectly cradles your back and spine with amazing ergonomic support that leaves you feeling refreshed and energized even after sitting all day.
Welcome back to The Rundown. Now, the psychological warfare continues for the family members of the remaining 90 hostages in Gaza. Now, of the 26 hostages still set to be released in phase 1 of the ceasefire, Hamas says 8 of those hostages are dead, bolstering fear for family members on the fate of their loved ones. Well, for more, we go now live to our I-24 News correspondent, Balir Sladin, joining us from Beilinson Hospital. Balir, the family members, they're feeling right now, they're awaiting this next batch of the releases, and 2 specifically releases are scheduled for this week alone. But what are the fears, what are the concerns that some of these family members are feeling right now?
Yes, so Hamas gave Israel this week the list of the alive hostages and those who are dead. But let's be clear about this. The list is numerical list. So Israel knows that 8 of the hostages are not among the living and the rest are alive and well, but doesn't know who exactly. So it doesn't detail which of the hostages is still alive and which is not. And that's why we've heard today Danny Elgert in the Knesset speaking and saying that this phase of the deal will see the return of his brother that is in Hamas's captivity, but he assumes that his brother is not among the living, and he is going to be back in a coffin. Unfortunately, he is blaming the Israeli government for prolonging the process of accepting this ceasefire deal and exchange of prisoners. He said that just in November he was alive, and even in the previous cycle of negotiations, let's call it, back in May, of course, he was alive, and Israel declined to go to that deal, and that's why he is now going to be back in a coffin. There is also more concern regarding the fate of the Bibas family, specifically Shiri and her 2 children. We know that the Israeli authorities back in the beginning even of 2024 said to the family that apparently they are not among the living, but the hope didn't leave the family of the Bibas. But still now, when we know that 8 of the hostages are not among the living, and for the fact that Hamas did not release them, although that they were supposed to be released first, because the females first, and the babies should be first, but they did not release them. So apparently they're going to be in the last or the end of this phase, and apparently, unfortunately, they're also not among the living.
Heartbreaking news as we are finding out more about exactly who will be coming back. Now, meanwhile, Balir, those who have already returned, you're at the Beilinson Hospital where Naama, Liri, Daniela, and Karina are receiving treatment. Right now, 3 days since their release, exactly what have we learned about their time in Hamas captivity?
Yes, well, let's start with what we know from the doctors and nurses here. They underwent today a series of medical treatments, and of course they are still receiving the psychological and emotional support that they need. And they are saying that in general they are in good condition. We also hear from Naama for the first time today. She posted on Instagram a post saying that she's fine at home after 477 days, and she is saying that she was kept alone for the first 50 days alone in Gaza, and then she was transferred to meet with other hostages, including the female soldiers that were released with her back in Saturday, and that gave them hope and that gave them strength. And she is confirming what we know from other hostages as well, that they saw what is happening in Israel. They saw that in the TV and also heard that on the radio. They knew that the efforts were being made to release them by their families, by the supporters for their families, and that gave them hope and strength, of course. And we're getting some more information about in general what happened to them during captivity, but of course the family is asking to respect their privacy. But we can say a few details about being kept for up to 8 months in tunnels, but they also spent some time in some of the civilian homes in Gaza, and for many days there were little to no food actually on their table. And only in the last few days before their release, they felt or sensed that there's something happening, and they were giving better food. They were giving the opportunity to take a shower and also change their clothes, which apparently that's part of Hamas's propaganda, of course, to show them to the world that they have treated them well for this long period of time.
The propaganda certainly does continue, but it is good to know that they are back receiving that much-needed treatment and reunited with their families as well. Bolir Sladian at Beilinson Hospital, thanks for the update. Now, still with me here in studio, I'm with Lieutenant Colonel in Reserves Jonathan Conricus, former international spokesman for the IDF, as well as the senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Jonathan, right now we're talking about the hostages that are to be released in phase 1 of this deal, 33 over the course of 42 days. However, Hamas now says that they have begun discussing the framework to begin negotiations for phase 2 of this deal, arguably the more complex and complicated phase of this deal. Phase 2 means ending the war. At this point, what are the assurances that phase 2 will actually happen?
Yeah, I think the matter here, this is of course the more complex part. Hamas, I think, understands very clearly that their only leverage and their only way to stay alive as an organization and in power in Gaza is by keeping Israeli hostages. In my mind, as harsh and as cruel as it sounds, the issue will be how many Israeli hostages will be left behind or will be left in Hamas's hands once the war starts again. I cannot see a situation where Hamas gives up all of the hostages and they come back to their families or to burial. And I think that Israel cannot tolerate such a situation. So there will be negotiations. Hamas will haggle for a higher price, and we will see exorbitant numbers of Palestinian terrorists released for each and every live and dead soldier. And as that will come to completion, I think that Hamas will do the very cruel Machiavellian thing of keeping Israeli hostages in Gaza, and that will force Israel to go back to fighting. What matters most is to get, of course, our Israeli brothers and sisters back. At the time, that will probably only be our brothers back to Israel. And the Israeli imperative will be to front load and to release as many Israeli hostages as possible in the first parts of the second part of the deal, which Hamas will oppose to. And at the end of the day, this will be very tense moments, very, very challenging for families. And I am extremely sad to think about the fate of those families who probably won't get to see their loved ones, dead or alive. Some probably will. But I think now, even though there is tremendous American pressure and global pressure to get this done, I don't see a way by which Hamas does the right and the humane thing of releasing the hostages, because that would mean that they wouldn't have any more leverage, and they're not going to have that.
This is their only bargaining chip going forward, it seems.
It is.
Now, it's not just the Israelis that are held captive right now, because among the 90 hostages still in Gaza, 10 of them are actually foreign nationals. There's 8 Thais, 1 Nepalese, and 1 Tanzanian, none of whom are set to be released in phase 1 of the ceasefire. But now there are some reports of a side deal that could be in the works to release these foreign nationals sooner than expected, leading Shamir Medical Center in central Israel to prepare for possibly treating foreign nationals once again, something the hospital did in November 2023 when Hamas released 23 Thai nationals and 1 Filipino. To talk more about these preparations, we're joined now by the Director General of Shamir Medical Center, Dr. Osnat Lefzion Korach. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Hi, good evening.
Now, right now, exactly how is the hospital prepared just in general to treat any of the released hostages?
So we're actually prepared in both for Israelis and for foreigners. We have a lot of experience because last year we had the privilege to treat 24 of them, as you mentioned. So and what's the difference? We have to remember that they have no families. So that's if one thing is that the hospital is their family. The hospital, the embassy, last time we worked very, very closely with the Thai embassy that was with us 24/7. I do think that unlike the last time, which they spoke no English, no Hebrew, I guess they might speak some Arabic now, but we don't know, of course. The one thing is there are some cultural differences that we learned, and we're now well acquainted. For example, we had a Buddha statue, which they prayed every night, and there were many other things that we learned about them, and by then we were still in contact with some of them.
You're still in contact with some of those who were released, you're saying,
yes,
right now, even though that they've returned home. It's amazing, and I think it does touch on one of the points that you just made, is the fact that they have no family here in Israel, and so no one is truly visiting them there in the hospital. And so does this take on then an extra weight for the hospital staff treating them?
I think it's a real privilege for the staff because that's the warmth, that's the familial atmosphere, and we all worked very hard of providing them the best care and the best atmosphere that they could be in. And we saw it. At first, they were shy and lonely and barely spoke. And then at the end of it, they sang and they ate, and they played the guitar, and they were together, and you can see in the pictures, they were smiling, and it was a very, very warm connection.
It is amazing to see those pictures, and hopefully we do see the release of more of them soon. Now, as far as just these differences you mentioned in treating both Israeli hostages and foreign nationals, because it's not just the fact that they have no family, but you touched briefly on these cultural differences. How else is the hospital prepared, and the lessons that they learned back from November 2023?
So, for example, when we prepared the rooms last time, we thought that each one would like to be in a single room. And then when they came, they said, no, we want to be together. So now this time we already planned the rooms for 2 of them. So that's the way the rooms are planned. Food is adjusted. We have, by the way, already the dietitian guidelines in Thai. Everything we have also already translated to Thai. We had, and we all through this year, we were in very close relationship with the embassy, which you can see in the picture, the ambassador standing next to me. And again, we had to, at the first few days when they were with us, we had to learn each other. But then we adjusted everything and just worked fluently. And we're looking forward to these hostages to bring them back.
Now, when you're looking at these pictures, these are men that were released after 50-plus days in Hamas captivity, but the foreign nationals that could be released soon, we're talking about 480 days in Hamas captivity. And so what are you preparing for possibly the hardest challenges to be? Is it going to be recovering from starvation, getting back on a feeding schedule, even recovering to seeing the light of day after possibly being held in tunnels for months on end? What could be the most difficult part in treating these men?
I think it's all of the above, plus the mental thing, the emotional thing. We could see in the 24 that came that some were held in groups. Actually, some were held with Israelis as well. Then some were and some were held by themselves, and we could see the differences, the effect, and the challenges. Of course, they were very thin when they came back after 54 days, so we don't know what to expect. But we are already, and as you mentioned, the refeeding syndrome is one of the most dangerous things that we need to look at, as well as other electrolytes and physical disturbances from being in the tunnels, starved, injured, maybe some of their injuries from October 7th or else time, different times during these 480 days that were not properly treated. So we're all set for everything.
It's amazing to hear.
As well as the mental health, and as well as with the embassies, with translators and psychologists. We also have a psychologist that speaks Thai and Israeli, who was very, 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 very helpful last time, and he is with us again this time.
Dr. Osnat Levtzion Korach, it sounds like the hospital is well prepared, and hopefully we will see the release of those hostages soon, and they will be in those safe hands very quickly. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Good evening.
Now, with the ceasefire in effect, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, said, quote, "The small, limited Gaza brought the Zionist regime, armed to the teeth and fully supported by America, to its knees." However, it did fail to mention the Hamas terror group at all. Now, Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, also had some words to say about the United States in an interview with Sky News, clapping back against U.S. President Trump's suggestion of relocating Palestinians, stating, instead of Palestinians, try to expel Israelis, take them to Greenland so they can kill two birds with one stone. The foreign minister also warned against the U.S. attack on Iran's nuclear facility, stating he doubts that the United States or Israel will do such a, quote, crazy thing. Well, still with me in studio, Lieutenant Colonel in Reserves Jonathan Conricus, as well as joining us, our I-24 News Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osaran. Now, Jonathan, is this such a crazy thing to think that the United States backed, or Israel backed by the United States, could actually go after Iran's nuclear facilities? The repercussions, Iran right now claiming, will be massive for not only Israel, but America as well.
So they say. They also said that Israel wouldn't be able to strike any targets in Iran, and Israel proved the contrary. I think that window of opportunity is still there, and I think that we've heard insinuations from President Trump and responses by the Iranians. Everybody understands that that option is on the table, and President Trump is using a possible Israeli strike on Iran's nuclear facilities as leverage in order to get the Iranians to the negotiating table. I suppose, if I understand and if I read President Trump's messages correctly, then he wants negotiations and he wants some kind of a deal without the use of force. But if we look at reality, military reality, Iran is still very much exposed, even though they have repurposed air defenses and they have replenished some of their destroyed capabilities. Iran is still exposed, and Israel has the ability to strike a lot of their capacities, and that window of opportunity is still there. It looks as if Israel is going to allow diplomacy under Trump to run its course, which...
Would that be the best move for Israel? Because if diplomacy works, is the threat still of nuclear facility and nuclear action still there without completely wiping it off?
Yeah, I think it's very important to be clear about the Islamic Republic of Iran. That regime is a menace to the region. It is an exporter of terrorism. It is a regime that is made up of crazy fundamentalist people, and if they get their hands on nuclear weapons, that is bad news for the world. Now, how do we avoid that? Will it be Israel doing the world's dirty work again, like Israel did in 1981 in 2007, or will it be a more comprehensive international effort against Iran? Either way, the worst thing that can happen is Iran obtaining nuclear weapons, and the less bad thing is for Israel or the US to take them out. I don't see them dismantling themselves, and as such, there are very few other options left.
We're going to move now to news coming out of Syria as well, as the IDF says it's boosting its presence by building new temporary army posts on the Syrian side of Mount Hermon. Now you can see here some of the insulated buildings the Army has added to help soldiers during the harsh winter months. These structures include a medical building to treat cold weather injuries. Now the military had said that this buffer zone deployment was a defensive and temporary move. But during his visit to the border today, Defense Minister Israel Katz said troops will remain there indefinitely.
I came here to ensure that the IDF is well prepared, both defensively and offensively, for an extended stay at the Hermon outposts. The IDF will remain at the Hermon summit and in the security zone for an indefinite period to secure the Golan Heights, the north, and all the residents of Israel. We will not return to the reality of October 7th, and we will not rely on others for our defense, here or anywhere else. We will not allow hostile forces to establish themselves in the security zone in southern Syria, from here to the Sueda-Damascus axis, and will act against any threat. We will maintain ties with friendly populations in the area for good neighborly relations, particularly with the large Druze population, which shares close historical and familial ties with our Druze brothers who are citizens of Israel, whom the State of Israel is first and foremost committed to protecting.
Good neighborly relations. That could certainly be a good thing for Israel with this new frontier, it seems, on Syria. But Ariel, are we hearing anything from the Syrian government? What do they make of this move, possibly indefinitely having Israeli troops right there in the buffer zone?
Yeah, before the Syrian response, I just want to note that under the Biden administration, Israel Katz said that this would be a temporary measure. And now with the new Trump administration, he's saying that this is going to be indefinite. So this change in messaging, I think, is very interesting with the change of administrations in the White House. Now, specifically regarding how Syria is responding to this, last week, the de facto leader of Syria, Ahmed al-Shara, he said that Israel's actions in southern Syria are a strategic mistake for the region, saying that the pretext of the existence of Iranian militias in the area is no longer relevant because there are no Iranian militias, as they themselves, HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, who he stands at the head of, they expelled them from Syria. But we are not seeing more than just singular statements here. There are no real let alone action against Israeli forces, but no real steps, real measures by the new Syrian administration regarding Israel's activity. They don't like to see this. They would like it to end. We should say that Israeli strikes in Syria on the former assets of the Syrian army under Assad, those have stopped. We haven't seen those in days, if not weeks, but the presence persists and it is becoming more permanent, and so this could create more tensions with the temporary Syrian government, or the new Syrian government. I will just note that they have so many other problems undermined, that what Israel is doing now, which isn't considered really offensive activity, but rather undermining sovereignty, that is something that until now they're absorbing. We'll see how long that will last for.
Ariel, we also just saw a meeting with the HTS leader Ahmed al-Shara and the Palestinian Authority Prime Minister. And so when we're talking about Israel, the Palestinian Authority also playing into this role, since it's not far from their border either. And so what should we make of this meeting between the two?
Yeah, I think this latest visit by Prime Minister Mohammed Mustafa is the latest in a string of visits by Arab leaders, diplomats, who are making a diplomatic pilgrimage to Damascus to meet the new leader. Everyone wants to stake their claim, make sure to see kind of what they can work with. There was no readout or statements from the Syrian side. On the Palestinian side, saying that Mustafa said that the visit comes in as an expression of the PA's supportive stance towards Syria and the new administration. Obviously, there's also the issues of Palestinian refugees that needs to be discussed. But this is, I would put this in line with the flurry of diplomatic visits that we've seen to Syria, but nothing out of the ordinary.
Certainly interesting as we continue to see this action that we're taking place. Jonathan, I want your take when it comes to the strategic or military gains that Israel has by keeping this presence indefinitely on the border with Syria.
I see it as a bargaining chip. I don't think that Israel has territorial claims over it. It is very important, key strategic terrain. Being there allows Israel to prevent anybody else from being there. And the power or country or organization that holds the Hermon basically benefits from a 360-degree unobstructed view. Damascus, northern Israel, and on a good day, Beirut and the Lebanese mountains as well. And therefore, it's important for Israel to be there as long as there is instability and uncertainty with regards to what's going on in Syria. And I think that Israeli caution about the intentions and the actions of the new regime in Syria are very well based, and they are very much called for. Yes, the new government in Syria is saying the right things and playing the right tune for Western ears, but what matters really is actions. And at the end of the day, the people that are currently running Syria are people that grew up and nurtured jihadism and violent extremist Islam and believe in the implementation of Sharia as modern political governance. And Israel has to keep that in mind and be very, very vigilant. I would only hope that Israel would be able to trade and barter with the tools that it has available in order to get future stability, security, and even though it is a word that we rarely mention these days, but perhaps peace or something that resembles it with regards to Syria, it is a long time in the future. But I think the fact that we are now establishing a longer term presence indicates that that is going to be what Israel is going to be aiming for.
Now, we have a quick breaking news update into the I-24 newsroom just moments ago. The IDF announcing that a civilian defense ministry contractor was killed in an incident of friendly fire while operating inside Gaza earlier today. And coming back to you, Ariel, do we have any details as far as this incident?
Yeah, 39-year-old Yaakov Avitan. He is, as you mentioned, a civilian contractor for Israel's defense ministry. According to the initial IDF probe, Avitan was operating D9 heavy machinery to clear rubble in Gaza. He approached one of the IDF posts, one of the few that remain now in this ceasefire period, approached the forces, didn't heed to their calls, and one of the soldiers at the post opened fire, killing Avitan. The IDF military police is investigating the incident.
Tragic incident, it seems, but the proper investigations hopefully underway as well. Our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran and Lieutenant Colonel in Reserves Jonathan Conriquez, Senior Fellow with the FDD. Thank you both for joining us on this latest edition of The Rundown. Thanks. On that note, we are going out for a break here on I-24 News. You can always head to i24news.tv for more updates on these breaking developments happening right here in Israel and the region. For now, I'm Nicole Zedek, and thank you so much for tuning in.
You live in Israel or you are preparing for your Aliyah? Congratulations. You have a smartphone? Perfect. Download the Olim app for free and discover everything we have to offer. Booking medical and administrative appointments, bills paying, debt verification, instant translation, contractor recommendation, request tracking, and much more. And if you can't manage it on your own, our team speaks your language and assists you with all your procedures in Israel, starting from 199 shekels per month, unlimited and for the whole family. Don't hesitate any longer. Download the app or contact us.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
דניאלה, לירי, נעמה וקרינה.
לירי, חיים שלי! עם הכלבייה.
Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are?
Introducing I-24 News' brand new news website.
On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the I-24 News app today.
The 7th of October set in motion a chain of events. Today, Israel's enemies are severely weakened, but not defeated, and the balance of power is shifting. This region never rests. And for its own survival, Israel needs to keep its finger on the pulse. If you want to better understand, if you want to hear voices you won't hear elsewhere, then tune in daily to Middle East Now on I-24 News.
Welcome to Jewish World Weekly on I-24 News. I'm Emily Francis. Every week we'll focus on stories, issues, and personalities of Jewish interest here in Israel and in the diaspora as the global Jewish community. And we start our top 5 items in the Jewish world presented by Nicole Zedek. Hello, Nicole.
Thanks, Emily. Here are the top 5 items in the Jewish world this week. Ireland's Jewish leaders are criticizing President Michael Higgins for his, quote, inappropriate comments about Israel's war with Hamas during the country's Holocaust Memorial Day commemorations. Protesters were forcibly removed after turning their back on Higgins, who drew comparisons between the Holocaust and the war in Gaza. Prior to the commemorations, Irish Jews had already urged Higgins to remain apolitical out of respect to the victims of the Holocaust. A Polish woman returned around 1,000 items belonging to Jewish people from Auschwitz. The items include Judaica, children's toys, clothes, watches, and Torah scrolls, and were taken from the concentration camp by the woman's father, who worked as a cleaner at Auschwitz. The artifacts will now be displayed by the Auschwitz-Birkenau Museum. An inquiry by the Belgian government has found that the Belgian National Railway Company should not pay compensation to the descendants of Jews who were transported on its train tracks to concentration camps. The inquiry said the organization should apologize for its role in the mass deportations, but placed the, quote, collective responsibility of the trains on the complacent Belgian government and people. Jewish groups are slamming the ruling. A Jewish man has been jailed for 2.5 years for planning to attack a synagogue. Matthew Maurer was jailed alongside his accomplice, Christopher Brown, in a decision that's divided New York's Jewish community. Many feeling Brown took advantage of Maurer, who has PTSD and autism. Maurer has since undergone rehabilitation and apologized for his role in the plot. And finally, 14 people have been inducted into the International Jewish Sports Hall of Fame. Most notable, NBA legend and Orthodox Jewish convert Amar'e Stoudemire, iconic Argentinian soccer commentator Andres Cantor, and 1984 Olympic judo medalist Robert Berland are all on the list. The International Jewish Sports Hall of Fame has inducted more than 500 people from more than 30 countries since 1979. And those are all of the top 5 items in the Jewish world this week. Back to you, Emily.
Last week, Donald Trump was inaugurated as the 47th American president, with his inauguration featuring a speech by Yeshiva University President Rabbi Ari Berman. And his inauguration parade highlighted the plight of the Israeli hostages in captivity in Gaza, including some American Israelis. But according to most exit polls, American Jews voted overwhelmingly for his opponent, Kamala Harris. His vote share among the Jewish community increased from his showing in 2020. But now many American Jews are wondering what the next 4 years has in store. Joining me in studio now to talk about these issues and more is Ron Campias, the former Washington bureau chief for the Jewish Telegraphic Agency and a veteran journalist who has spent decades covering the Jewish world. Hello, and thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So a lot going on. To be a journalist for so many years, these are definitely times I think we haven't seen in American and Israeli history combining at the same time. So explain your views as a journalist, what direction you think this could go, especially as we saw what Elon Musk did, and he obviously came under a lot of criticism. Your thoughts on all that?
I think, you know, the first couple of weeks of the Trump administration, in terms of the Jewish community, Jewish voters, Jewish observers, they're going to be celebrating the release of the hostages, frankly. I think that was... they're going to see that. Obviously, it was a joint operation between the outgoing Biden administration and the incoming Trump administration, but it's going to be seen with some justification as Trump's victory. He said there would be hell to pay. I think that here in Israel, the people I've spoken to say that was translated more as something that Netanyahu had to listen to. And in any case, there are 7 hostages out. There are another 25 that could come out in the next few weeks, and that's what people are going to focus on. Longer term, I think there's just a lot of uncertainty. The Musk appointment, his influence in the administration, what that means, given the apparent Nazi salute, and as well as his backing for AfD, a party with roots in among neo-Nazis, that is going to disturb a lot of people. To what degree does President Trump heed that information? To what degree does he internalize it? To what degree does he reject it? I think that's going to be a preoccupation of the Jewish community going forward. Yeah,
for sure. And you know, what about the ADL's response? Kind of surprising. They weren't completely calling crying foul. We know that Musk has been here, and people close to him say this is not the case. So your response to ADL's response?
You know, I think ADL has to be cautious. They're dealing with a very powerful man in Elon Musk. They're dealing with a new administration. I think that a lot of people I saw on social media had what would have been more the traditional ADL response, which is that looked exactly like a Nazi salute. Maybe you didn't intend it as a Nazi salute, but you need to explain to us what went on there. And Musk has kept on trolling. He hasn't really explained what was happening when he made that salute. And he hasn't bothered to address, I think, a lot of the legitimate Jewish concerns, because a lot of other Jewish organizations in the States, the Jewish Council for Public Affairs, were very, very concerned by it. No, I don't know if anybody actually thinks that Musk himself is a Nazi or internalizes Nazi beliefs, but he is somebody who likes attention, obviously.
And it's not sensitive. I mean, even if it wasn't that, it's insensitive.
It's insensitive, and it was followed up by his comments at a conference recently that the Germans have had enough of remembering. It's time for them to forget, or remarks to that effect. Nobody's saying, I don't think there's a legitimate Jewish scholar or Jewish organizations that's saying that the visits of the great-grandfathers should be visited on the great-grandchildren, but they should definitely be aware of what went on in the past, just like any country that has, on whose name crimes have been committed, should be aware of what went on in the past.
So overall, Jews in the United States, what do you think? I mean, is there a hope, a trepidation? I mean, we know generally more Jews are vote left, but this is very complicated at times, different than what we've seen throughout American history.
Like I said, I think they're just in wait-and-see mode, and they're like a little worried about the signs that have come forward. I think that, like I said, I think there's going to be a lot of rejoicing because of the release of the hostages. But then you have you have the isolationist element of Trump's advisors coming through in terms of a senior official who was associated with the Quincy Institute, which was an organization that preaches isolationism, preaches like ramping down the confrontation with Iran. I think that the organizations that are more conservative, more hawkish, that hoped Trump would be more confrontational with Iran, they're kind of waiting and seeing now. They don't know whether that's going to play out.
All right. Thank you very, very much. Ram Kampias, thank you for your assessment, as always. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
This week, on International Holocaust Remembrance Day, the world commemorates the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau. This after 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust. A European Union delegation to Israel paid tribute to the survivors at a special Holocaust event in Herzliya in conjunction with Yad Vashem. Here's my report with survivors who are lighting up the path of remembrance.
Profound honor for me to join you today at Beit Juliana as we mark International Holocaust Remembrance Day and commemorate the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau.
An emotional celebration of survivors mixed with a painful reminder of the horrors of the Holocaust.
You are living witnesses to history and the source of hope for all of us. Your voices urge us to ensure that never again is not just a pledge, but a reality.
The European Union delegation to Israel and Yad Vashem converged at Herzliya's Bet Juliana Assisted Living Center, home to several Holocaust survivors.
My parents, they gave me to a non-Jewish family to keep me, and they tried to escape to Swiss, and when they should come back, they will pick me up, but they didn't came back. I was 1 year, and when the war finished, I was 4 years.
My dad was originally a journalist who in 1933 wrote against the Nazis. They looked for him immediately, and his neighbor told him, "Leave quickly and take your suitcase." They managed to get on the last truck that brought soldiers from the border, and they arrived in Brussels, where I was born.
The reality of war coming full circle literally landed on Bet Juliana's doorstep on Yom Kippur. Hezbollah fired a drone into Israel that hit Rachel Fish's apartment, a reminder of the fragility of life.
After things started heating up for Jews, my mom's best friend contacted her and said, "You know, we are not gonna forget you." Her husband's partner in Bruges agreed to hide us, which was dangerous to his family and to us. We lived in the attic of their home.
The crowd was also entranced by the film documenting the miraculous journey of Yaakov Wexler Waskenel. Yaakov's Jewish parents made the most difficult choice, one that saved their son's life and soul.
I know for sure that on March the 25th, 1943, my Jewish mother brought me to the window of my Polish mother's house. And I was around 8 days old. I thought they were my real parents until I was 49 years old. They were always my beloved parents. Stopping her tears, my mother told me everything. She simply said that I was a child of Jewish parents. I didn't imagine it was to such an extent.
Yaakov committed his life to the church, becoming a priest on his own volition. But it's something he later found out fulfilled the wishes of his dying mother, who saved her son by martyring herself.
Anyway, it was a deep pain when my mother told me about the wishes of my Jewish mother. Therefore, I felt very close to him, to Jesus. I felt a deep gratitude for being Jewish. It rose to life like a volcano, erupted like a volcano with all its might. But the fact that I'm Jewish was something big.
So big that Yaakov made Aliyah to Israel, found relatives he didn't know existed, and devoted himself to rediscovering his Jewish roots and beyond.
In 2009, I came to Israel, not as a new Jewish immigrant, because I was a priest. I found work at Yad Vashem, where I worked for 13 years until last year when I retired.
At the tender age of 76, Yaakov officially became a man, having his bar mitzvah with Israel's chief Rabbi Lau. And his Polish adoptive parents, Amelia and Piotr Waskanel, were recognized as righteous among the nations. A glimmer of hope that there is humanity even in the darkest of times.
We Europeans consider it a sacred duty to condemn and repudiate the factories of death that the Nazis and their local collaborators set up in our continent and beyond, with the sole goal to annihilate every single Jew they could find.
Do you feel hope for the future for the Jewish people and for Israel?
There are days that I don't have hope, and then a few days later I have hope again. We passed so many things. I think we will survive. We have this country, we didn't got it for nothing. They said always in Europe, go to your country. That means go back to Israel. So we are here, we stay here, and I don't want to go to any other country.
And I believe that God is with us. This is the God of Israel. I want there to be peace, not just in Israel, but across the whole world.
Harrowing stories indeed, and there is a very real possibility that this could happen again. A study from the Conference of Jewish Material Claims has shown that the majority of adults around the world believe that a genocide against the Jewish people could happen again. Joining us now from Toronto is Honorary Professor Erwin Kotler, the International Chair of the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights and former Justice Minister and Attorney General of Canada. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good speaking with you.
So what do we make? We know that the anti-Semitism has only been rising globally in the wake of October 7th, not that it wasn't there before. So we're now seeing this in Canada in so many places you wouldn't even think about, not just large cities. What is the tide and how are Jews feeling being there?
Well, you know, at the end of 2022, when I was in the special envoy for combating anti-Semitism, I reported then that what we were witnessing was a mainstreaming, normalizing, legitimation of anti-Semitism in the political culture, the popular culture, entertainment, sports, and in particular, the campus culture. But most importantly, with an absence of outrage, with indifference and inaction in the face of that. And I think that was the backdrop to what happened post-October 7th. The embers were already burning before that. Then with October 7th, the horrific, unspeakable mass atrocities perpetrated not only by a terrorist organization, Hamas, but by an anti-Semitic genocidal terrorist organization. Not because I say so, but because they've said so in their founding charter, and since then, post-October 7th, said they would commit such atrocities again and again and again. One would have thought that this would have resulted in a uniform condemnation of anti-Semitism, in action against anti-Semitism. On the contrary, what we've seen has been a denial even that the atrocities have taken place. And what we've seen in Canada, for example, has been in the public squares, marches, support for such mass atrocities, justification of them, in fact, even celebration and glorification of them. And that's why, at this point, I think it has to be realized, I said this in a meeting with our Canadian Prime Minister not too long ago, that this anti-Semitism is not just threatening to Jews. It's toxic to democracies. It's an assault on our fundamental freedoms and on our, indeed, even national security. And as we've learned only too painfully and too well, that while it begins with Jews, it doesn't end with Jews.
Yeah, and also a new study showed that a staggering number of adults didn't even know about the Holocaust. This includes half of the young people, even in France, which is so insane to think about when so much energy is being put on Holocaust education. But is this kind of part and parcel of what we're seeing about the diluting of history and the experience of the Jewish people?
Yes, we had a similar report here in Canada, but with similar data that's repeated itself. That's why we've sought to make the teaching of the Holocaust and education be the Holocaust mandatory in high schools and the like. But it's not just about Holocaust education. We need education regarding anti-Semitism. You know, we're speaking now on International Holocaust Remembrance Day, which is, of course, the 80th anniversary of the liberation of the death camp Auschwitz, the worst extermination camp of the 20th century. Now, 1.3 million people were deported to the death camp Auschwitz. 1.1 million of them were Jews. Let there be no mistake about it. Jews were murdered at Auschwitz because of anti-Semitism. But anti-Semitism itself did not die in Auschwitz. It remains the bloodied canary in the mineshaft of global evil today. And that is why, again, as I said in meeting with political leaders here in Canada, at this point, what we need are not just statements of condemnation. We need action. We need effective enforcement of the laws, etc.
So what kind of actions, if any, are being taken? Because like I said earlier, we are seeing violence like in Winnipeg, even as far as, you know, the western coast of Canada. Canada is a very, very big place with a lot of provinces. Are we seeing it everywhere in all the communities throughout Canada?
We're seeing it throughout Canada. We've had a dramatic rise in hate crimes targeting Jews and incendiary hate speech. Jews are 1% of the population of Canada, yet they are the targets of over 70% of religiously motivated hate crimes. And with regard to incendiary hate speech, here too, there is more hate speech targeting Jews than against any other and all other minorities combined. And that is why we need effective action, not just declarations from the government, not just performative tweets and the like, but in fact, when you have these demonstrations, they're not just pro-Palestinian demonstrations. Peaceful protest pro-Palestinian is fine. What we're seeing in the public squares, in the streets of Montreal and Toronto and Winnipeg, what we're seeing are pro-Hamas demonstrations, pro-Iran demonstrations. And each time these demonstrations take place, I can tell you as a former Minister of Justice, etc., that a half a dozen crimes under the criminal code are being committed, whether we talk about unlawful assembly, we talk about public incitement to hatred, etc. So what we need is effective enforcement of the laws. And what I recommended that the country do is have a national forum on anti-Semitism of an urgent character, bringing together federal, provincial, municipal governments, because they work in silos, bringing together prosecutors, law enforcement officials, and the like, so that we can not only have an action plan, but in fact implement it. We do have plans, they're not yet being implemented.
Wow. Well, if there's anyone who's the right person to push it through, it is you. Thank you very much. Honorable Professor Irwin Cotler, the International Chair of the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights, as well as former Justice Minister and Attorney General of Canada. Much appreciated. Thank you very much.
Not at all. Good speaking with you.
Jews make up less than 2.5% of the American population, but when it comes to business acumen, Jews are often viewed as punching above their weight, which may have led to Jewish business owners being left out of America's federal minority business community. Here's more from I-24 News senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim reporting that oversight has been remedied.
Jews are a minority. It seems like such an obvious statement, but Jews have not been classified as such when it comes to federal business benefits. That changed earlier this month when the Orthodox Jewish Chamber of Commerce signed a landmark memorandum of understanding with the U.S. Department of Commerce and its Minority Business Development Agency to include Jewish business owners among those minorities eligible for government contracts, loans, grants, and participation in educational and advancement initiatives.
There's endless hundreds and hundreds of different programs that every single Jewish business is going to benefit from. This is very unique because as the Orthodox Jewish Chamber of Commerce, we focus on helping people in different industries, whether it's health, medical, real estate, expos, conferences, job placements, trainings. This is something that impacts everyone, every single business in the Jewish world in all 50 states.
Duvi Honig, the founder and CEO of the Orthodox Jewish Chamber of Commerce, told us that he's been building partnerships with other minority communities for years, and the MOU signed with the Commerce Department is a direct result of those relationships.
So I advocated for it a long time. I said, we need the Department of Commerce to work from the bottom up, not the top down. That's the only way we'll be able to help the American economy. And I brought 30 chambers, African American, Hispanic, diversified, 5 boroughs, West Coast, East Coast, and we had 30 top chambers, and I had over here National Roundtable in this room. So by being able to be inclusive for everyone, empower everyone, we were able to say, hey, what about me? And that was the approach that we were successful with, because we really mean it.
An influential politician from a Jew-heavy New Jersey district told us the impact in his community could be enormous.
Lakewood Township being the largest Jewish community in all of New Jersey, we have 10,000 students in the college there. Only a very small portion, like 5%, go in to become rabbinical teachers or rabbis. The other 95% go into business entrepreneurship. They become CPAs, they become doctors, lawyers, and Indian chiefs as such. This will encourage them to stay in New Jersey, develop businesses, and qualify for dollars and cents, which is so important.
But one question is why? Why did it take so long for the federal government to make this happen?
It's the obvious answer, which is we're thought of because of the success of many people in our community. They forget about the people that don't always have the same advantages or talents, and so we get labeled, in the same way we get labeled, and unfortunately in many ways, in anti-Semitic ways, we get labeled as a group that doesn't need help.
While the memorandum was signed in the final days of the Biden administration, the Trump admin's incoming Deputy Commerce Secretary attended, showing a commitment to seeing the initiative through. The Minority Business Development Agency is now working on a new application to include Jewish-owned businesses for qualification as minority business enterprises, which will open the door to the wide range of the government benefits available. Reporting here from the Commerce Department in Washington, Mike Wagenheim, I-24 News.
Thank you all so much for watching Jewish World Weekly on I-24 News. Sure hope you enjoyed it. We'll be back next week with a brand new episode, but until then, shalom from Tel Aviv.